Eridan raced north along the greenway. He'd followed the track from the ford until it left the river and veered off northeast across the moors. Now the reassuringly hard stones of the road carried him northward. If he stopped to water Gwaenur at the woodside inn, he could be in Bree by dawn. The thin, waning crescent moon of early evening had set, but the road was made a dark, silvered band by the bright stars. Soon, he heard hooves from behind. He glanced over his shoulder as one of the Nazgul appeared from the dark, its black robes billowing in the wind of its passage. The dark steed, made wild and tortured by fell sorcery, started to gain on him. Oranor, like her mother and father before her, had been with the Green Company all her life. Her people had roamed the cold marches of Himrain for generations, holding in check the Rudarim tribes and the remaining Orc clans that roamed too far south from Khan Doom. Over the last decade or so, there had been more raids and skirmishes across the north, but Chieftain Aragorn had wanted the Green Company and others to watch the south marches. Isildur's bane was on the move, it was said. Spies from the south were ever encroaching on Arthedain's borders. And so, Oranor found herself camped for a fourth of the year on the southernmost extent of the Greenway, in a camp in the ruins of the old Huntsman Inn. Long had it been abandoned, but it served as a store for provisions and weapons. The ruins stood in a dell to the east of the road, which drove northward on a green bank. A dozen tents, scattered among tall oak trees, faced the road. When she wasn't scouting or on watch, Oranor filled her evenings with music, dice and smoking. She would sit with her friends Miviril, Brennian and Vorondil around a low brazier, listening to one of the rangers languidly strumming a lute as they argued over which was the finer pipeweed.
Longbottom leaf,
declared Brennian.
without a doubt.
Then you've never smoked Southlinch,
countered Vorondil. Oranor grimaced.
I'd rather smoked nettles than that Bree stuff.
Oranor smiled. She often joked that the rangers of Arthedain only existed to protect the fields of pipeweed. The argument, which occurred whenever there were pipes to smoke and a fire to sit around, always started jokingly, but could grow into impassioned finger-pointing and fist-waving. Oranor had even had to break up fights.
Old Toby for me,
said Miviril after blowing a few smoke rings.
they can't grow enough of...
There were hoofbeats towards the road, and Oranor glanced up. As she looked away, 3 dark riders in black robes leaped onto the greenway. She sprang up from her stool as the riders turned and galloped northward. The others sat staring in confusion, and some of the other rangers quailed in fear. Oranor herself felt an unaccountable weakening sickness, bordering on despair. How could 3 black riders instill such? One of the rangers, a brave, hard man who had fought orcs and wolves in the North Downs, shook with terror as he stared at the riders. Hanar's arms were pinned to his sides and he seemed rooted to the ground. He was trying to say something through his tears until he finally wailed a word that Oranor had not heard since her childhood.
Nazgul.
Right!
She shouted and ran with the others towards the horses. As they mounted up, Halbarad of the Grey Company appeared on the ridge. A moment later, Ivorwen and Belagorn were alongside him. Oranor was already leading her rangers to meet Halbarad and the others.
Oranor,
The captain called.
follow me!
The 7 rangers moved off northward. They followed the Nazgul for what seemed miles until one of them left the greenway and rode west across the moors. Halbarad rode alongside Oranor.
Stay with those 2 riders. They must not reach Bree.
Norolim!
Oranor cried and her horse leaped forward. Halbarad looked around for Belagorn.
With me.
The 2 rangers of the Grey Company veered from the road and followed the lone Nazgul cross-country. Oranor led her company after the 2 remaining Nazgul. She smiled grimly at Ivorwen as she brought her horse alongside her. Dawn came, and it was beautiful. Hiswen had been pursuing 3 Nazgul west along the San Road all night. She had followed them for a league or so until her horse had tired while theirs galloped onwards. But she had followed them nonetheless, tracking them along the San Road under the pale starlight. Now, she saw crossroads ahead. Here, the hill road struck northwest until it met the river Shireborn before continuing through green hill country to the Tuckland Road. Hiswen dismounted and read the tracks at the junction for a long while. One of the Nazgul had turned right. Another had taken the lane that forked off east and southward. The seldom used Haven Road led to Nimlund, the haven on the Baranduin, 40 leagues downstream from Sarn Ford. The third Nazgul's sign showed a horse that had not slowed. It had galloped through the junction onward along the Sarn Road. Hiswen overtook her quarry 8 leagues east of the last inn. The rider must have tarried along the road, perhaps pausing at the few villages and farmsteads. But why? A mile or so west of the hamlet of Tunnock, the road narrowed, and the verges on either side rose up to low stone walls, thick with moss and weeds. As soon as she caught sight of the Nazgul, it had disappeared around a bend. When she reached the bend, the road straightened out, but the Nazgul was gone. Eradan turned left off the greenway onto the Hayes End Road. The morning was bright and still, at odds with the terror he was experiencing. Gwena had so far been able to outrun the Nazgul, but she'd been at full gallop for nigh on 14 leagues and was starting to tire. Eradan knew now that he would not reach Bree via the Greenway and the Andrath, but he knew the Brown Company were watching the southern Barrow Downs. He looked over his shoulder. The Nazgul had gained on him as Gwena sped on towards the camp at Old Tom's Lane. He'd be safe there. To the south, the morning welcomed another Nazgul. The sun cast long shadows across the grass, shorn close by, scattering sheep. Halbarad and Belagorn had been following the rider for hours, but it was clear that they were being led in circles. The black horse was always too fast for the rangers. At times it slowed, and Halbarad thought they might overtake it. But then it would speed off again, turning this way and that. He guessed that they were just east of Amlaith Lane when the Nazgul had turned east into the rising sun. As they gave chase, Belagorn started to veer off to the north. Halbarad called his name, but if he heard him, he made no answer.
Where are you going?
Halbarad glanced at the Nazgul, then back at Belagorn. He squeezed his horse's flanks and hastened after the black steed. Belagorn had no inkling of how long he had been chasing the Black Rider. The night had seemed endless, and even now the dawn seemed to stretch out as though the sun had become stuck on the horizon. But he charged onward after the Nazgul, his eyes glazed and his expression dour. He had a vague sense that Halbarad had left him, but when and why he could not tell. It all seemed like a dream now, and he'd lost all purpose, not knowing why he was pursuing these riders. There were 2 Nazgul before him. Had there always been 2? He vaguely recalled that he and Halbarad had chased one Black Rider from the old Huntsman Inn. 2 rangers, 1 Nazgul. He blinked, and one of the riders was gone. As he looked about, the remaining rider started to shimmer, a strange grey light, almost like smoke. At the moment the Nazgul disappeared, Belagorn heard hoofbeats directly behind him. His eyes refocused, and it was as though he had just woken from a light sleep. He looked over his shoulder at the Nazgul that was now alongside him, its sword drawn, but there was nothing he could do. Halbarad's horse charged after the Nazgul, following the enchanted black steed as it banked round in a wide arc. He could see Belagorn riding ahead. The Black Rider rushed onward. Halbarad implored his horse to go faster, but she was exhausted. The Nazgul drew alongside Belagorn, its sword drawn. As the brave, faithful ranger looked despairingly over his shoulder, the Nazgul's robes billowed out. The swords swung and the robes whipped like a corsair's flag, revealing a headless ranger.
Belagorn!
Halbarad screamed, but it sounded as though he were underwater.